They said he turned $10,000 into more than 200 million before his 40th birthday. But that number was never the story. The story was how he did it and why he believed anyone else could do the same. Richard Dennis wasn't a Wall Street prodigy groomed in Ivy League corridors. He was a kid from the south side of Chicago, born with a stutter, who found his voice not through words but through markets. When people mocked him for being quiet, he learned to listen better. When people told him trading was luck, he decided to prove them wrong with math, logic, and an unshakable belief in discipline. He started as a runner at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, earning barely enough to eat lunch. But every day, as he carried orders for others, he was studying, watching, memorizing how the market moved like an animal, sometimes calm, sometimes wild. He noticed patterns no one else cared about: how price broke above certain levels, how fear turned to greed in seconds. While others talked, he took notes. By his early 20s, Dennis borrowed $1,600, $1,000 from his family, $600 from his savings, and began trading his own account. Most thought it was foolish, but he turned that small stake into his first million within a few years. He wasn't chasing excitement, he was chasing structure. He said later, "I always thought trading was just a matter of following the rules." That was the foundation of everything to come, the belief that success didn't require genius, only a system, and the discipline to follow it. The more money he made, the more he began to notice something strange. Traders around him were failing for reasons that had nothing to do with knowledge. They knew charts, they knew news, but they couldn't control themselves. They broke rules when scared, doubled down when angry, sold too soon when greedy. Dennis saw that the battlefield of trading wasn't the exchange floor, it was the human mind. And that realization became an obsession. In the early 1980s, Dennis had become one of the most successful commodity traders in America. He was young, wealthy, and bored. Over dinner one night with his friend William Eckhart, another brilliant trader, a debate started. Dennis claimed great traders could be trained, like soldiers. Eckhart disagreed. He believed trading success was innate, a talent you were born with. Dennis refused to accept that. "Give me a group of people," he said, "and I'll teach them how to trade. I'll make traders out of anyone." That conversation became a wager that would make history. Dennis placed ads in the newspapers inviting ordinary people to apply. The ad said, "We're going to train people to trade." Thousands responded. From all walks of life: accountants, musicians, engineers, even a security guard. He selected just a few dozen, none of them professional traders. Some had never even seen a futures contract. He called them turtles, inspired by a visit to a turtle farm in Singapore where he saw baby turtles being bred in huge numbers. "We're going to grow traders like they grow turtles," he said. For 2 weeks, he and Eckhart taught them everything. The rules were simple, almost painfully so. Follow trends, cut losses quickly, let winners run, trade only when the system gives a signal. Risk a small fixed percentage per trade, no emotions, no opinions, only execution. Then he gave each of them real money, his money, to trade. The experiment began. What followed shocked the world. Within 4 years, the turtles had made over $100 million. Some went on to become legends themselves: Curtis Faith, Jerry Parker, Tom Shanks. They weren't born traders, they were trained traders. Proof that discipline could beat instinct, that rules could conquer emotion, and that knowledge, when coupled with belief, could rewrite destiny. Dennis said later, "It's not about predicting, it's about responding." He didn't train them to guess the future. He trained them to react to reality without bias, to accept uncertainty not as danger, but as truth. Because markets, like life, never move in straight lines. They swing between chaos and order, testing every conviction. The turtles learned that survival depended not on brilliance, but on humility, the willingness to follow a rule even when it felt wrong. Behind the experiment was something deeper: Dennis's philosophy of mind. He believed thinking could be trained the same way a muscle could. The turtles weren't just learning markets, they were learning themselves. They confronted fear, greed, ego, and the illusion of control. Each trade was a mirror reflecting their psychology. Every loss was a test of patience. Every gain was a test of restraint. Dennis told them, "If you can't follow a system, you don't need a better system. You need a better mindset." What made Dennis different wasn't his method. It was his faith in human adaptability. He believed logic could be stronger than impulse, that rules could be more reliable than emotion. To him, the purpose of trading wasn't to make money, but to master self control. The money was the result, the discipline was the cause. And yet, beneath his calm exterior, Dennis was still human. In the late 1980s, he broke his own rules, overleveraged his positions, and suffered heavy losses. The man who had taught discipline learned the hardest truth. Knowing the rules doesn't mean you'll always follow them. But even then, he never blamed the markets. He said, "Markets are never wrong, opinions often are." It was a statement of humility, a reminder that the true opponent is never the chart, but the mind behind it. The story of Richard Dennis isn't just a story about trading. It's about belief. It's about the courage to test an idea against the world and to prove that mastery isn't genetic, it's built. His experiment remains one of the most extraordinary demonstrations of what happens when knowledge meets conviction. The turtles didn't just learn to make money, they learned to think differently. They learned that emotions are data to be managed, not suppressed. That losses are part of the process, not proof of failure. That wealth isn't earned through prediction, but through consistency. If there's one lesson from Richard Dennis, it's that success is teachable, but discipline is personal. You can hand someone a map, but you can't make them follow the path. He gave his students rules, but what he really gave them was a mirror to see their own behavior with clarity, to realize that the greatest edge in trading and in life isn't intelligence or luck, it's control. The markets reward those who stay calm when others panic. They punish those who seek excitement instead of patience. Dennis understood that long before neuroscience could explain it. He knew that fear and greed were just biological signals, and that the only way to master them was through structure. His legacy isn't the millions he made, but the minds he shaped, because he didn't just create traders, he created thinkers. And thinkers don't follow the market, they follow the truth within themselves. The turtle experiment spread like wildfire through the financial world. Everyone wanted to know what secret formula they had learned, what hidden code they had discovered. But there was no secret. The truth was too simple for most people to believe. It was rules, mechanical, emotionless, tested. Dennis had taught them to buy when prices broke above a threshold and to sell when they fell below. He had taught them how to size their positions so that no single trade could destroy them. He had taught them that survival mattered more than perfection. And yet, the real lesson wasn't in the numbers. It was in the discipline to obey them. When the markets moved violently, fear gripped even the best of them. Some turtles froze, some overtraded, some questioned the rules. Dennis watched and said, "The rules are your life raft. When the storm comes, hold on tighter, Cider. Don't let go." It was a metaphor not just for trading, but for living. Because every market storm mirrors a moment in life where everything feels uncertain. Most people break their own principles in panic. The few who don't become exceptional. Dennis knew this because he had lived it. He had faced days when everything he touched turned to loss, when the system he believed in seemed broken. But he never blamed the system. He blamed the impulse. "A good system is like a mirror," he once said. "If you don't like what you see, it's not the mirror that's wrong." That mindset separated him from almost every other trader of his era. His teachings transformed the turtles far beyond trading floors. One of them, Jerry Parker, went on to manage billions, still using the same rules decades later. Another, Curtis Faith, became an author, teaching others that success was less about insight and more about consistency. They all carried a version of Dennis's philosophy into their own lives, that mastery of self was the only sustainable advantage. What Richard Dennis created was not a group of traders, but a living experiment in human psychology. He proved that when given the same information, different people would produce completely different results, not because the system changed, but because their minds did. Two people can follow the same plan. One wins, the other fails. The difference is not intelligence, it's discipline. One follows the rules even when it hurts, the other lets emotion take the wheel. That's why Dennis used to say, "You don't trade the markets, you trade your beliefs about the markets." To him, the market was neutral. It didn't care about anyone's opinion, prediction, or confidence. It rewarded behavior that aligned with probability and punished everything else. That's why he was never interested in being right, only in being consistent. The turtle experiment was also a philosophical statement against the myth of talent. Dennis believed talent was overrated and that most people used it as an excuse for mediocrity. People like to believe in genius, he said, because it lets them off the hook. To believe that success can be taught means believing that you could be successful too, and that responsibility scares people. But Dennis wasn't afraid of that responsibility. He carried it like a creed. If he could make money by following rules, anyone could, if they were willing to follow the rules when it was hardest to do so. That belief made him both a trader and a teacher. Every lesson he gave the turtles was a lesson about control. Don't double down on losses. Don't move your stop. Don't break the system because of a feeling. Feelings pass, rules stay. Over time, he watched the ones who obeyed rise and the ones who improvised fall. It was a brutal but honest experiment in human behavior. He once said that trading was like meditation. You learn to detach from the noise, to observe yourself acting under pressure. The price chart becomes a mirror of your inner state. When you panic, it shows. When you're patient, it rewards. The market has no mercy, but it has perfect feedback, and in that feedback lies the truth about who you are. Dennis's life was filled with paradox. He was a mathematician who talked like a philosopher, a man who made millions by detaching from money. He didn't worship wealth, he studied its patterns. To him, money was data, not identity. It measured discipline, not worth. That detachment gave him clarity, and it was that clarity he tried to pass on. But clarity has a cost. When Dennis returned to trading after the experiment, the markets had changed. Volatility increased, correlations shifted, and trend following became harder. The man who had once turned logic into fortune found himself questioning the very logic he had created. He broke rules, chased losses, tried to outsmart randomness, and the markets humbled him again. He lost tens of millions. Yet even in defeat, his philosophy held. He didn't hide. He admitted his mistake. I didn't fail the system, he said. I failed to follow it. Those words became an echo that outlived his career, because every trader who heard them recognized the truth. Everyone fails the same way, by breaking their own discipline. Every crash, every loss, every downfall begins with one thought. This time is different. But it never is. The rules exist precisely for those moments when the mind loses balance. That's why Dennis always insisted, test your system when you feel least like following it. He used to describe emotion as noise in the signal. A trader's job was to reduce noise, to clear the channel between decision and action. When fear enters, the signal distorts. When greed enters, it distorts again. Only detachment preserves clarity. That's why he trained his turtles not to predict, but to respond. The market doesn't punish those who are wrong, it punishes those who refuse to admit they are wrong. In his later years, Dennis grew more reflective. He often said that what he truly wanted wasn't more profit, but more understanding. The turtle experiment, in his mind, was a metaphor for human potential. He proved that knowledge can be transmitted, but wisdom must be earned. He could teach the rules, but he couldn't teach restraint. He could explain risk, but he couldn't give patience. Those things had to be chosen, one decision at a time. In the end, that's what made Richard Dennis not just a trader, but a philosopher of human behavior. He transformed a commodity market into a classroom of self-awareness. Every price movement became a lesson in humility. Every drawdown became a sermon on patience. He once said, trading is about learning to be wrong gracefully. That line contained his entire philosophy of life. Because in the market, as in life, control is an illusion. All you can do is manage risk, follow rules, and accept that uncertainty is permanent. The goal isn't to eliminate loss, but to survive it, to learn from it, to stay in the game long enough for the odds to work in your favor. Dennis understood that the game doesn't reward perfection. It rewards endurance. He left behind not just a system, but a legacy of mindset. The turtle traders went on to manage billions, teach thousands, and inspire millions. But more importantly, they carried his message forward, that greatness is not born, it's trained, and the training never ends. Richard Dennis used to say that every trader carries two enemies inside them, fear and hope. Fear cuts profits short and hope lets losses run. The irony is that both emotions feel right when they appear. Fear whispers that you should protect yourself, hope tells you that things will get better. But the market doesn't care about feelings. It rewards only those who act according to probability, not emotion. That's what he tried to teach the turtles, to replace emotion with evidence, reaction with rule, noise with signal. One of his students once asked him if he ever felt fear when trading millions of dollars. He laughed and said, "Of course I do, but I just don't listen to it." That was the essence of his philosophy. Feelings are inevitable. Obedience is optional. The turtles learned to feel fear but not follow it, to recognize greed but not obey it. That skill, emotional awareness without emotional reaction, became their greatest edge. Dennis believed the human brain wasn't designed for markets. Evolution trained us to survive, not to trade. In the wild, running from danger saves you. In the market, it destroys you. When prices fall, instinct says flee. But systems say wait. When prices rise, instinct says chase, but rules say hold. The discipline to override instinct separates the professional from the crowd. That's why Dennis used to remind his students, you're not fighting the market, you're fighting yourself. As the turtles matured, they realized something deeper. The system Dennis gave them was simple, but following it wasn't easy. There were times when they lost for months, watching their accounts shrink while every cell in their body screamed to quit. But those who stayed found that faith in the rules was stronger than the pain of drawdowns. Over time, they saw the market reward patience, not prediction. Many people misunderstand the turtle story. They think it's about a magic formula or a legendary experiment, but in truth, it's a parable about human behavior. The same rules that made the turtles rich were available to everyone, yet few could follow them. Why? Because discipline is rarer than intelligence. Information is everywhere, but self-control is scarce. Dennis proved that success doesn't depend on secrets, it depends on self-mastery. When people asked him why he shared his method so openly, he said, "I could publish the rules in a newspaper and still nobody would follow them." He was right. The market isn't beaten by knowledge, it's beaten by patience. Every trader eventually faces the same test. Can you follow your plan when it hurts the most? That test defines whether you survive or disappear. Dennis himself passed through that test many times. He made fortunes and lost them, rebuilt and broke again. But he never blamed fate. To him, the losses were tuition, the price of understanding. He once said, "Losing money is part of trading. Losing confidence is fatal." The difference between temporary pain and permanent failure was psychological. As long as you stayed calm, the system would save you. But the moment you broke it, you were on your own. In the quiet moments of reflection, Dennis saw his experiment as something more than trading. It was a study of belief. Could belief shape behavior strong enough to overcome biology? Could a person become rational by choice? He believed they could. The turtle rules were just a framework for building that belief, step by step, trade by trade. The process turned fear into discipline, uncertainty into habit, randomness into rhythm. The story spread across the financial world because it offered hope. It said that greatness could be learned, that ordinary people could train themselves into extraordinary performers. But hidden beneath that optimism was a darker truth. Training your mind means untraining your nature. It means confronting every impulse, every doubt, every emotion that once protected you. Few are willing to go that far. That's why there are millions of traders, but only a handful of masters. Dennis often told his students to think of themselves as scientists, not gamblers. Your job, he said, is not to be right. It's to follow the process that gives you the highest chance of being right over time. That mindset freed them from needing to win every trade. Losses stopped feeling like failures. They became data points. Once emotion was removed, performance improved naturally. It was never about prediction. It was about execution. The markets of the 1980s were a wild frontier, fast, loud, unpredictable. But Dennis thrived because he built structure inside chaos. His charts, his systems, his rules, they were scaffolding against the storm. He proved that order can exist even in randomness if you define it yourself. And that lesson applies far beyond trading. In life, too, the world is uncertain. The only control you have is how you respond. After decades, many of the original turtles still quote Dennis when teaching others. They say the markets change, but psychology doesn't. Human fear and greed remain constant, repeating in every era. Algorithms may trade faster now, data may be infinite, but emotion is still the bottleneck. That's why his philosophy survives long after his career faded, because it wasn't about a system, it was about the human condition. In interviews later in life, Dennis spoke softly about his legacy. He didn't talk about profits or losses. He talked about the people he trained, the minds he shaped. If I taught them anything, he said, it's that rules make you free. That paradox defines him: freedom through structure, creativity through constraint, confidence through humility. He understood that discipline wasn't limitation, it was liberation from chaos. And that's the final irony. The man who built fortune by following strict rules did so to experience something beyond money: clarity. The peace that comes from knowing what to do even when the world doesn't make sense. That peace can't be bought. It must be earned through repetition, through patience, through failure. Richard Dennis's legacy lives not in charts or numbers, but in a simple truth. Mastery is not born from instinct. It is forged in structure, tested by time, and proven by restraint. The turtle traders learned that wealth is not the reward for predicting the future. It is the reflection of mastering the present. Because in the end, trading, like life, is not about controlling outcomes. It's about controlling yourself when outcomes can't be controlled. Richard Dennis once said that the market is the greatest teacher because it never lies. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't sympathize, and it doesn't forgive. It tells the truth through price every second of every day. When you're arrogant, it humbles you. When you're fearful, it tempts you. When you're patient, it rewards you. That's why he called it the most honest mirror ever created. It shows who you are when no one else is watching. The turtles learned that lesson the hard way. Some became rich, some quit, some lost everything. They all had the same system, but they didn't all have the same mind. The rules were identical, yet the results were not. Because rules don't fail. People do. It's easy to follow logic when it agrees with your emotions. It's almost impossible when it doesn't. The real test came in those quiet moments, staring at a screen, when every instinct screamed to break the rule and do something. The ones who didn't touch the system became legends. Dennis believed the hardest part of trading wasn't technical, it was philosophical. To him, the market was an extension of human nature. Every tick, every move was a reflection of collective psychology. When he looked at a chart, he didn't just see numbers, he saw emotion: fear trying to escape, greed trying to dominate, pride trying to hide. The market was a battlefield of minds, and most people lost because they were fighting others instead of themselves. He told his students something they never forgot: the market doesn't beat you, you beat yourself. Those words haunted them because they were true not just in trading, but in life. Every broken rule, every emotional decision, every rushed impulse, it wasn't the market's fault, it was theirs. That realization was both painful and freeing. Painful because it removed excuses, freeing because it meant they had power. The idea that discipline could be taught wasn't just revolutionary in finance, it was revolutionary in thought. Most people believe behavior is fixed, that temperament is destiny. Dennis refused that idea. He believed you could reprogram your reactions the same way you train a muscle. Habits could override instincts, rules could rewire fear. He was, in essence, a behavioral scientist decades before the term existed. He didn't call it psychology, he called it practice. And his method worked because it was brutally simple. He made the turtles trade real money, not simulations, because the mind only learns when there's pain attached. Theory means nothing until your capital is on the line. When losses became real, their inner voices grew loud. That was when the real training began, not in the classroom, but in the confrontation between rule and emotion. Curtis Faith once said that Dennis's greatest lesson wasn't in the mechanics of trading, but in emotional control. He taught them to treat every trade like a soldier treats orders. You don't question, you execute. Faith later realized that those lessons applied to life itself. Follow your principles even when the outcome is uncertain. Discipline isn't obedience to others, it's obedience to your own wisdom. Dennis didn't teach them to chase certainty. He taught them to thrive in uncertainty. He knew the market was unpredictable, but he also knew unpredictability didn't mean chaos. It meant probability, and probability could be managed. Risk could be measured. That's why his rules were statistical, not emotional. He didn't ask, what do you feel about this trade? He asked, what does the data say? He understood that feelings fluctuate, but numbers don't. There's something poetic about his life. He built his empire on patterns, yet his greatest creation was human transformation. The turtle experiment became legend not because of the money it made, but because of what it proved that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they removed emotion from decision making. The system wasn't the hero, the mindset was. But the same man who taught others discipline was also human enough to break it. When he lost heavily in later years, it wasn't because his system failed, it was because he stopped believing in his own rules. That irony became part of his myth. It showed that no one, not even a master, escapes emotion forever. Even he admitted that discipline must be renewed every day, like breathing. You don't conquer your emotions once, you learn to live with them. When asked years later if he regretted training others, Dennis smiled and said, "Not at all." The experiment proved what I needed to know. It proved that success is teachable. But then he paused and added, "It also proved that staying disciplined is harder than learning discipline." That final sentence captured everything. Knowledge is easy to acquire. Consistency is not. Many of his students described him as calm but intense, logical yet spiritual. He believed in data, but he also believed in destiny. He saw trading as a path towards self-understanding. The charts were just tools for reflection. Every position was a confession. Every profit was a lesson in humility. Every loss was a reminder of impermanence. In that sense, he turned finance into philosophy. What made him unique wasn't his intelligence, it was his ability to turn wisdom into structure. He didn't talk about emotions abstractly, he gave rules that shaped behavior. When fear said sell, the system said hold. When greed said buy more, the system said stop. Every rule was a psychological boundary designed to protect the trader from himself, and those who respected those boundaries found freedom inside them. That's the paradox at the heart of his legacy. Freedom through discipline. Most people think freedom means doing whatever you want. Dennis knew the opposite. Freedom means mastering your impulses so they no longer control you. That's why he could make millions while others lost everything. He wasn't smarter, he was steadier. As he grew older, Dennis became reflective about what success really meant. He admitted that making money was never the point. The market was just a laboratory, a place to test principles about human behavior. It's not about getting rich, he said. It's about proving that reason can win. Those who knew him said that was the essence of his life. Faith in reason, faith in structure, faith in discipline. If there's one lesson that survives from his story, it's that consistency beats brilliance. Brilliance shines for a moment. Consistency endures. The turtles who lasted weren't the fastest learners or the boldest risk takers. They were the ones who could endure boredom, control fear, and stay humble in success. They understood that the goal wasn't to feel smart, it was to stay steady. Richard Dennis didn't leave behind a temple or a book of commandments. He left behind an idea that rules can free you, that discipline can shape destiny, and that wealth, real wealth, comes from mastering yourself, not the market. Because once you master yourself, the market, the chaos, and the world itself all begin to make a little more sense. Richard Dennis never looked like what people imagined a millionaire trader to be. He dressed simply, spoke softly, and moved with the calmness of someone who had already made peace with uncertainty. In the chaos of the trading pits, where men shouted and shoved for profit, he stood still. He didn't fight the noise, he watched it, the way a scientist observes a reaction. And in that stillness, he saw something everyone else missed: the market's rhythm, the pulse beneath the panic. He used to say, "When you learn to hear the rhythm, the noise stops mattering." The turtles would later recall how he trained them not just to read charts, but to read themselves. Before each session, he'd remind them that discipline was not about control, it was about awareness. You couldn't control the market, but you could control your reaction to it. That was the only power a trader truly had. If they lost that, they lost everything. He told them, "You are not your profits, you are your process." It sounded simple, but it was one of the hardest truths to accept in a world that measured worth in numbers. He made them log every thought before and after a trade, what they felt, what they feared, what they expected. Those journals became mirrors. They began to notice that their worst losses didn't come from bad signals, but from good signals ignored. not from faulty systems, but from broken patience. The problem was never the rule, it was the moment they thought they were smarter than the rule. Dennis believed ego was the most expensive emotion in the market. Confidence built wealth, but ego destroyed it. He could spot ego in an instant, in the trader who added too much to a winning position, in the one who refused to cut a loss because it would turn around. He said, the market punishes pride faster than ignorance. And he was right, because ignorance can learn, but pride never listens. His philosophy wasn't just about trading, it was about living. He said that markets teach humility because they don't care who you are. The same rule that applies to a billionaire applies to a beginner. There's no privilege, no favoritism, only cause and effect. Uh, that's what fascinated him most, the purity of consequence. Every decision had a result, and no excuse could change it. He used to tell his students, the market is the fairest judge you'll ever meet. It gives you exactly what you deserve. Over time, the turtles began to understand that they weren't in the business of prediction. They were in the business of probability. The goal wasn't to be right, it was to manage risk. Dennis drilled that into them until it became instinct. You can lose more often than you win, he said, and still come out ahead if you manage size and stay in the game. That single insight became one of the most powerful lessons in financial history. Because while most traders obsessed over accuracy, Dennis obsessed over survival. He often compared trading to crossing a desert. You can't control the heat, the wind, or the distance. You can only control your pace. The ones who rush burn out. The ones who hesitate never move. But those who keep walking, step by step, always reach the other side. It wasn't about brilliance, it was about endurance. The turtles who understood that never stopped walking. What made Dennis remarkable wasn't that he made money. It was that he saw money as a side effect, not the goal. He viewed trading as a discipline of thought, a way to shape the mind. To him, the charts were just tools for understanding human behavior, starting with his own. The market wasn't random, it was a mirror reflecting mass psychology. Every bubble was greed, every crash was fear, and every recovery was resilience. The same pattern over and over, dressed in different numbers. He used to say that trading was the purest expression of truth because it stripped away illusion. In the market, you couldn't hide behind charm, words, or reputation. The numbers spoke for you. That's why he respected the market even when it hurt him. It's not cruel, he said. It's honest. And that honesty shaped him into one of the most self-aware minds of his time. Years after the turtle experiment ended, when journalists asked him why so few people succeeded even after learning his system, he smiled. Because they think they're learning about markets, he said, but they're really learning about themselves. Some of his students called it enlightenment. Others called it torture, because learning about yourself means confronting what you don't want to see. Your impatience, your arrogance, your fear of being wrong. The market has a way of holding up that mirror until you look. Dennis's life also carried its own cycle of rise and fall, mirroring the markets he studied. After losing much of his fortune, he didn't hide or vanish. He accepted it the same way he accepted a losing trade, as data. He told a friend, "If I can't handle losing, I never understood the game." To him, loss wasn't failure, it was tuition, the cost of wisdom. He said the only true failure was to stop learning. In his later years, he became fascinated with the intersection of economics and emotion. He would say, all wealth starts as a state of mind. Not because thoughts magically make money, but because belief determines behavior. If you believe success is luck, you'll chase luck. If you believe it's discipline, you'll build habits. The turtles who lasted shared that belief. They didn't pray for the market to move, they prepared for it. The more Dennis aged, the less he talked about profits and the more he talked about principles. He warned against confusing activity with progress. He said the modern world was full of noise, more data, more opinions, more distractions. But truth hadn't changed. The rule that worked 40 years ago still works today, he said, because people haven't changed. The tools evolve, the screens get faster, but the mind remains the same. Fear and greed, hope and regret, unchanged since the beginning. He often ended his lectures with a single sentence that captured his entire philosophy. Master the mind, and the market follows. It wasn't literal. He didn't mean the market bends to your will. He meant once you control your reactions, the chaos loses power. You start to see the world differently. Patterns appear, noise becomes rhythm, emotion becomes information. That was the true lesson he gave the turtles, and through them, the world. In the end, Richard Dennis proved something timeless. Systems don't make traders. Mindsets do. You can give two people the same map, and one will find gold while the other gets lost. The difference isn't the path, it's the traveler. He didn't train traders, he trained thinkers. And thinkers, unlike speculators, don't chase luck, they build conviction. That's why his name still echoes in the halls of finance decades later. Not because he made a fortune, but because he changed how people thought about fortune. He showed that the game isn't about predicting tomorrow, it's about managing today. He showed that wealth begins in the mind, long before it shows up in the account. And he showed that true mastery, whether in trading or in life, isn't about winning. It's about staying in the game long enough to let discipline do its work. There's a story one of the turtles used to tell about a morning in the training room. Richard Dennis walked in, holding a cup of coffee, looked around at the students, and said nothing for nearly a minute. The silence was uncomfortable. Then he pointed at the screen and asked, "How many of you think the market is random?" A few raised their hands. He smiled. "Good," he said, "because that means you'll respect it. But don't ever confuse random with unknowable. Patterns exist, but they reveal themselves only to the patient." Then he turned and walked out. That was the entire lesson that day, and it was one of the most important ones. Patience. That word became sacred in the turtle vocabulary. It wasn't just about waiting for the right signal. It was about waiting for your emotions to calm before you acted. They learned to sit through boredom, through anxiety, through the unbearable stillness of markets that refuse to move. Dennis knew that the best trades often came right after the moment you were about to give up. He used to say the market rewards those who wait longer than everyone else. He understood time differently than most people. To him, time wasn't an obstacle, it was a filter. It separated the disciplined from the impulsive. Every hour of waiting removed another weak hand from the game. That's why he never feared corrections or drawdowns. He said those were the tests that proved whether you deserved the next rally. Every loss you survive, he said, is a rehearsal for victory. Some of the turtles couldn't bear the grind. They craved excitement, the rush of quick profits. Dennis saw that and warned them. If you need excitement, go to Vegas. This is not entertainment. This is evolution. He believed trading was a way to evolve beyond instinct, to become a rational creature in an emotional world. Every time you resisted the urge to act, you strengthened that evolution. Every time you followed a rule instead of a feeling, you rewired a part of yourself. He once told his students that the market is like the ocean. You can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf them. Most people drown because they fight the current, trying to force it their way. But the wise ones flow with it, using its power instead of resisting it. That metaphor stayed with them. It reminded them that survival was not about strength, but adaptability. In interviews, Dennis often compared trading to meditation. You sit still, you watch, you wait, he said. You don't react to every thought, you just observe it. He believed traders had to reach a state of emotional neutrality, a place where gains didn't excite and losses didn't sting. Only then could they see the market clearly. That's why he called emotion the fog of finance. The goal wasn't to remove it completely, but to see through it. By the end of the experiment, something fascinating happened. Many of the turtles started thinking less like traders and more like philosophers. They began quoting Dennis's lines like mantras: follow rules, not opinions; trust process, not prediction; cut losses, let winners run. What began as a financial training had turned into a school of mental discipline, and that, Dennis said, was the true purpose all along. He knew that in every field, not just trading, success depended on the same foundation: patience, consistency, and emotional control. He used the markets simply because they made those lessons unavoidable. Every tick forced reflection. Every position revealed weakness. The market was the perfect mirror for the mind. Decades later, when behavioral economists studied decision-making under pressure, they found evidence for what Dennis already knew intuitively. Humans are loss-averse, overconfident, and impulsive. They cling to hope and flee from pain. But with repetition and awareness, those reactions can be retrained. The turtles were living proof of that. They weren't superhuman, they were trained humans. Dennis's brilliance lay in his ability to design a system that forced discipline. The rules removed choice, and by removing choice, they removed emotion. The more rigid the system, the freer the trader. It sounded paradoxical, but it worked, because every trade made under those rules was one less opportunity for fear to interfere. Over time, that structure became instinct. The turtles didn't have to think anymore, they just acted. And that in that mechanical precision, they found peace. He once said, "A good system is like a compass in a storm. It doesn't calm the waves, but it keeps you from getting lost." That was the heart of his teaching. The compass didn't guarantee survival, but it made survival possible. And in a world ruled by uncertainty, possibility was enough. When he reflected on his career, Dennis often spoke about the illusion of control. People, he said, crave certainty so badly that they mistake confidence for knowledge. The more sure you are, he said, the more danger you're in. He taught the turtles to replace certainty with probability, arrogance with humility. They learned to say, "I don't know," without shame, because admitting uncertainty was the first step to managing it. There's an old story that one of the students told years later. During a losing streak, he asked Dennis if they should adjust the system to match new market conditions. Dennis replied, "If you change the system every time you lose, you'll never have a system." That sentence hit like thunder. It taught them that conviction doesn't mean being stubborn. It means trusting your framework even when it hurts. The rules were the rope that kept them from falling off the cliff of panic. As the years went on, the turtles spread across the world. Some became hedge fund managers, others teachers. But all of them carried a piece of Dennis's philosophy inside them. They passed it on to new generations, not as formulas, but as principles. Because formulas age, but principles don't. And the most enduring principle Dennis left behind was simple: discipline is freedom. In a world addicted to prediction, he showed that surrendering to structure is what gives you power. He proved that anyone, regardless of background, could become exceptional if they built rules strong enough to withstand emotion. He didn't care about followers or fame. What he cared about was proof that human behavior could be trained to align with reality. The market was just his testing ground. And in that test, he discovered something universal. Wealth is not about knowing more, it's about feeling less. The fewer emotions cloud your judgment, the clearer your path becomes. That's why, even now, when traders face chaos, they still whisper his words: trade small, follow rules, stay humble. Because those three commands are not just trading advice, they're a philosophy for life. Stay small enough to adapt. Follow principles when the world tempts you to break them. Stay humble enough to remember that no matter how high you rise, the market, the world, owes you nothing. Richard Dennis built an empire not on prediction, but on perspective. He understood that the greatest edge in any field isn't knowledge or speed, it's the calm mind in the middle of noise. And that calm, that stillness, is what turns ordinary systems into extraordinary results. It's what turned ordinary people into turtle traders, and it's what will always separate those who gamble from those who master the game. In the end, Richard Dennis's story wasn't about trading at all. It was about transformation. The market was just the stage where the human mind revealed its truth. Every trade, every loss, every surge of emotion was a test of character. He showed that success wasn't found in predicting the future. It was found in managing yourself in the present. The irony was that while everyone else was trying to conquer the market, Dennis had quietly learned to conquer himself. He often said that people overcomplicate what is simple and oversimplify what is complex. The market, to him, was simple but not easy. You followed rules, managed risk, and stayed consistent. But doing that day after day, year after year, was brutally hard because it meant fighting against the very instincts that made you human. The need to be right, the fear of missing out, the pain of losing, all of them had to be tamed. The price of mastery was constant self-awareness. Some of his students, years later, admitted that they didn't truly understand his lessons until long after they stopped trading. They began to see that everything Dennis taught about the market applied to life itself. Rules weren't just for trading, they were for living. Cut your losses meant let go of things that no longer serve you. Let winners run meant stay with what's working instead of chasing new distractions. Follow the system meant trust the process even when you don't see results yet. That was the hidden beauty of his philosophy. It scaled beyond finance. It became a blueprint for growth, for patience, for emotional control in every area of life. He had trained traders, but what he really created were thinkers, people who learned to see the world through the lens of probability, process, and discipline. Richard Dennis never wanted to be a guru. He never sold courses or wrote a self help book. His ideas spread because they worked. Uh, the turtle experiment became legend, not because of marketing, but because of results. Those who followed his system proved that an ordinary person could achieve extraordinary outcomes if they followed rules stronger than their emotions. That idea changed the psychology of trading forever. But behind the legend was a man who was deeply aware of the fragility of success. When he spoke of his own fortune, he often said, money is just a byproduct of good decisions. He knew that wealth without discipline was temporary. What mattered wasn't how much you made, but how you behaved when you had it. The ability to stay humble in success and rational in failure, that was the true edge. He once told a journalist, everyone wants the secret to success. The secret is that there is no secret. There's only doing what you said you'd do, long after the mood to do it has left you. That sentence captured the essence of his entire philosophy: consistency over emotion, structure over impulse, reason over noise. The turtles who embraced that philosophy carried it through decades of change. Some adapted it to new markets, others to new industries, but the core never changed. Whether they were trading commodities, running businesses, or simply navigating life, the same truths applied. Have rules, respect risk, and stay disciplined. When Dennis looked back on the experiment near the end of his career, he said something profound. I wanted to prove that you could teach trading, he said, but what I really proved was that you could teach discipline. That single realization turned his career from an experiment into a movement. It validated his belief that success is a teachable mindset, not a mysterious talent. He didn't glorify trading as a path to wealth, he saw it as a path to wisdom. The market will always do one of two things, he said. It will make you rich or it will make you wise. If you're lucky, it will do both, but only if you survive long enough to learn. For him, survival was the highest form of intelligence. Anyone could make a fortune once. Staying in the game for decades, that was the art. His life carried both triumph and tragedy. There were years when he lost millions, times when his system failed him, moments when his own confidence became his enemy. But even then, he never blamed the market. He always returned to the same principle. The market is never wrong. Our reactions are. He treated his losses not as punishment, but as reminders of humility. In that humility lay his greatness. The world around him changed. Screens replaced pits, algorithms replaced people, but his core teachings didn't age. They became more relevant. In an age of information overload, when everyone chases instant gratification, his lessons feel almost radical. Follow rules, wait, manage risk, stay calm, think long term. Those are the same principles that built empires and preserved them. What made Richard Dennis timeless wasn't his fortune, but his faith in the human mind. He believed the mind could be trained, refined, disciplined like a blade. He believed that emotion wasn't the enemy, it just needed a master. And he proved that mastery isn't about controlling the world outside, but the world inside. If you listen closely to every story about him, you hear the same tone of quiet respect. He wasn't loud or flamboyant. He didn't demand attention. He simply showed what was possible when reason led emotion. In an age of chaos, he built clarity. In a field ruled by fear, he built courage. And in a profession obsessed with luck, he built discipline. Today, decades after his experiment, his name still circulates in whispers among traders, thinkers, and dreamers. They mention him not as a myth, but as a reminder that systems are nothing without structure, and structure is nothing without belief. He proved that you don't need to predict the market to win. You only need to know yourself well enough not to destroy what you've built. That's why his story endures, because beneath the numbers, the strategies, and the charts, his lesson was universal. Control your emotions, and you control your destiny. The markets are unpredictable, but your response doesn't have to be. You can choose discipline over impulse, patience over panic, process over pride. And that choice, repeated over a lifetime, creates not just wealth, but wisdom. Richard Dennis once said, "The system doesn't make you rich, you make the system work." That sentence holds more truth than any financial theory ever written. It means success is never external, it's internal. It begins with the mind and it ends with the mind. And maybe that's why, even after all the wealth, all the fame, and all the loss, he was still at peace because he had proven his point. You can train traders, but if you train the mind, you change everything.